Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day, everyone. My name is Lidia Indah Lestari, and in this occasion, I will present my research about Korean dramas and music as educational tools for learning Korean language, college student experience. This is the table of contents for today's. First, there are introduction, second, literature review, third, research method, four, findings, five, discussion, and six, conclusion. First is the introduction. South Korea currently shaping something new and mainstream in various countries through K-pop or Korean pop music, drama series, movies, and video games. The success of Korean pop culture is proven by the emergence of the term the Korean wave as a form expression of how much influence the pop culture has spread. Korean wave is a phenomenon where Korean pop culture spreads globally in various countries in the world, including Indonesia. This phenomenon was followed by a lot of attention to South Korea products, such as cooking product, electronics product, music, and film. In fact, technological advances are an important factor in the spread of the Korean wave itself. The internet is the main access to reach the Korean wave. With internet access, we can play K-music and K-dramas easily, either through certain application or web using a mobile phone and can be accessed anytime and everywhere. There have been some studies about Korean wave. The study is focused more on Korean culture, the function of the internet at this time, and also how K-wave fanatism is towards teenagers. However, none of these studies mentions that actually K-drama and K-music can be one of the educational tools for Indonesian students, especially college students, to learn Korean language. The second is the literature review. According to Journal 2021, Korean dramas become popular because Korean dramas are more short-term, unlike the American shows who has a long-term. Korean dramas lasting for about 12 to 13 episodes in most cases. The other difference to American shows that the Western show is that many K-dramas very rarely have more than a couple of seasons. And then Wei Jising-hye in 2020 said that Korean wave or Hallyu, which is a Chinese term, is the rise of Korea's cultures, economy, and pop culture. And this Korean wave has made South Korea's top priority by its government. South Korea is one of the only countries in the world, if not the only one, with a dedicated goal to becoming the world's leading exporters of popular culture that is developing this soft power. Such soft power is realized through the emergence of K-dramas and K-musics. Therefore, the booming of those two things has stimulated people to learn Korean language through Korean dramas and Korean music. Hamdan and Ismail in 2018 did a research entitled Korean Dramas as Educational Tools that Develop Mutual Understanding Between Countries. They did a qualitative study by interviewing 4 respondents who had watched some Korean dramas. Their research discovers that there were 4 major terms related to the cultural proximity aspect that the participants experienced after watching K-dramas. They include language proximity, visual proximity, cultural proximity, and value proximity. In relation to enhancing mutual understanding between two countries, their study proved that Korean drama is an effective tool to develop mutual understanding between Malaysia and South Korea. Then there are the research methods. This study used qualitative method to elucidate the details of the participant experience in Korean dramas and musics. The participants are the IR students and do not have experience in learning Korean before, either of the private lessons or etc. The researchers conduct semi-structured interview format, and the questions were arranged in an interview protocol. The meaning is the participant can view the results of their interview and then can edit it as long as they wanted. And then semi-structured interviews were conducted via online platform and WhatsApp chat. Because considering there are pandemic and we can't meet directly, so the interviews were chosen through online platform. And then the findings. The first is IR students learn Korean language through Korean dramas and Korean musics. All the participants agree that learning Korean language through Korean dramas and music is interesting. As an interesting means of learning Korean language, the participants mentioned there are areas that they mostly focus on in learning the language. They included grammar, vocabulary, and Hangul, or the Korean writing system. In terms of grammar, most participants did not pay special attention to it as they were not supported with theory of Korean grammar. I think both Korean drama and music are best suited as a tool to learn Korean than other monotonous apps. Through Korean dramas and musics, I get the spirit to learn more. The more drama we watch, the more vocabulary we get. I usually learn the Hangul through music. I browse the lyrics with Hangul in it, read it, and sometimes I translate it sometimes. I do not get too much from drama because I always get distracted by the stories, said the participant number one. I think it depends on the intensity of the listener. If merely seeking entertainment through Korean drama and Korean music is lacking in its learning, but with personal experience through Korean drama and Korean music, uh, we will naturally learn the language ourselves so that we can begin to interpret Korean automatically. If you want to learn Korean indirectly, you can use Korean dramas and Korean musics. And if you really want to understand Korean, then learning Korean through Korean dramas and music is less effective, said participant number two. Second is the IS student view K-dramas and K-music as a tool to learn Korean language. All the participants agree that learning Korean through learning Hangul through Korean dramas and music is quite difficult. The three participants agree that the advantages of learning Korean language through Korean dramas and music is that the participants become more familiar with Korean language and make them slightly understand the language while watching Korean dramas or listening to Korean music. If there is an advantage, of course it's followed by the disadvantage. However, all the participants have different opinion about the disadvantage of learning Korean language through Korean dramas and Korean musics. Well, for the disadvantage is the loss of focus. Sometimes it is too much fun to focus on so you forget the purpose of the study, said participant number one. I think the lack of comprehension in the theory lies in learning only through lines of both dramas and Korean lyrics, said participant number three. Next is the discussion. This study showed that students at the university were familiar with Korean dramas and Korean music. They shared a similar view about Korean dramas and Korean music as a tool to learn Korean language. Through Korean dramas and Korean music, they learn several vocabularies and naturally remember it fast. They thought it would be so much easier to learn new language from Korean dramas and Korean music because at the same time they could enjoy the stories and the music. However, they had similar struggle in learning Korean language through Korean dramas and Korean music. The struggle are they could not learn the grammar. And the previous studies on Hamdan and Ismail in 2018 report similar results to the studies. Hamdan and Ismail showed that in the globalization era, studying can be done without using books. A drama can be effective and interactive educational methods that can develop mutual understanding. With television, they can learn new language. Television has more than one program that using other language, including Korean language. They can learn the language and understand the language naturally from the program that the teacher provided, including the program that provided by using the Korean language, so the viewers can naturally understand it. The last is the conclusion. From the analysis, show that Korean dramas and Korean music becomes the common things in our lives. Either for a fan or non-fan, at least know one Korean drama and have heard one Korean music. It showed that the effect of Korean wave is huge. This study also showed that learning Korean through Korean dramas and Korean music is possible. There is a lot advantage of learning Korean through Korean dramas and Korean music. It can advance of Korean vocabulary, new knowledge from the stories, and practice our listening ability and increase linguistic skills. The studies show positive impacts of watching Korean dramas and listening to Korean music towards Korean language learning and acquisition. Learners of Korean language as a foreign language then can be benefit from those two activities mentioned earlier in their indirect learning of Korean language. This is because watching Korean dramas and listening to Korean music will keep the spirit up and it makes studying seems not so stressful. However, watching Korean dramas and listening to Korean music is not recommended to some people that want to learn Korean language seriously. It is because in Korean dramas and music, there are no theory that explain about grammar, so it will be less effective. Thank you for your attention.